Okay, shall we start? Good morning, colleagues. Greetings to all. Thank you for coming to this session, this publication launch. I think we are all excited as DEG to have you in this room. And I would like to first acknowledge the MACO members from City of Cape Town, Alderman Eddie Andrews, for joining us today. And then Councillor Siseko, also the MACO member for Finance. Special welcome to you. And also welcoming the different officials from different municipalities, also our partners in the sector, and then our colleagues, DEC. Yeah, greetings to all. My name is Uchuma Kiyose. I am a project coordinator at DEG. For those who are not familiar, DEG is a development action group, which is an NGO that was established in 1986. It has been around, working with communities on the ground, working with government, working with sector stakeholders in order to advance the housing need of the communities at large. I think I'm not going to be long today. I'll just be the MC or program director for the first half of the day. I'm not going to be talking much today. There are different speakers who will be leading our conversation today. For us, it's just to welcome and then also introduce Ukethi. I would like to call on Ukethi Aranes, who is our executive director at DEG. I think she started last year as our ED, but Kathy has been around at DEG for many years, I think more than 20 years right now, if I'm correct. So she is our veteran there. We are guided by her. And I think I should welcome her to the stage to do the welcoming for us. I thank you.
Thank you, Tluma. Good morning, everybody. I think I pressed something here now. Yeah? Oh, okay. So on behalf of DAG, a warm welcome to everybody. I feel totally overwhelmed, but I'm going to do this now. And I think we're indeed fortunate to have an in-person event after 2 years under the pandemic. So welcome, everybody, and welcome to those who are joining us online. Okay. For me, this is a beautiful, beautiful day in Cape Town. Cape Town is showing off, so enjoy the day. It's beautiful. So having it at this venue also make it even more special. Okay? So we know that Cape Town is at times regarded as the most beautiful city in the world, but also the most unequal city in the world. So for me, being here, I regard your presence as an indication of your continued commitment of working towards making Cape Town a better place for all citizens. So especially the vulnerable and the dispossessed. So this event will focus on the research findings conducted by the HSRC. Thank you, Professor Ivan Turok, for leading on it. So it centers on incentives for emerging developers and emerging contractors to scale up the delivery of medium density housing. Medium density affordable rental units. So it's been 18 months of intense work, and it all started with a meeting our DAG staff members had with the City of Cape Town. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the staff members of DAG. I work with an exceptionally amazing, talented, skilled individual. Okay, they're passionate about their work. So, and I want to a special thank you to the Contractor and Developer Academy and the Land Value Capture team members. I take my hat off to you, really. So I'd like you just to stand and give them a round of applause because they go the extra mile all the time to make a success of this work. Well, there we go. All right. And they've been guided by two exceptional people who have a long history in DAG, Helen and Zama. Thank you very much. Okay. So, so today's event, according to me and according to many of my colleagues, would not have been possible without partnerships and collaborative research. I'm not sure if Rowena of Comic Relief is online. So DAG is funded by Comic Relief for this project, and the grant title is The Power of Collective Bargaining. So it's an apt description of what the project has been able to achieve thus far. So given our collective efforts to make it a success. So the project aims to strengthen the backyard rental sector and to contribute towards well-managed quality rental stock that can provide safe, affordable, and dignified housing opportunities. So it's another welcome and a thank you to all DAG's community partners, our civil society organizations, all the finance institutions being present here in person or virtually, or working with our teams to make a success of this project. Isandla, Miriam, are you here? Thank you very much, Miriam, for your guidance, for your research inputs, and with your team, Jens Mfundo, the HSRC, the built environment professionals, emerging contractors and our emerging developers, and all our urban sector organizations, and the many friends of DAG will continue to walk this path with us. So the one thing that I value the most in DAG, or one of the things that I value in DAG, is the pride that we have in the research work that we conduct. It's grounded in what our communities experience on a daily basis. So we look forward to gaining further insights into the research and receiving feedback on the findings and the recommendations. So another warm welcome, Professor Ivan Turok, Alan Changana, who will be moderating the session, and all the panelists. You are no strangers to DAG. So welcome and thank you for agreeing to do this with us. So then, Deputy Mayor of the City of Cape Town, Alderman Eddie Andrews, thank you very much. We recognize and we appreciate your support that you expressed for this particular project. Thank you very much. And then last but not least, a warm welcome to the board members who are present, especially Wilhelmina Trout, who's our chairperson of the board. Thank you, Wilhelmina, for always giving us the support, for making sure that we do the right thing at the right time, you know, for leading us. So thank you very much. And Wilhelmina's also agreed to do the thank you, and the closing remarks. So thank you, Gavin Wiseman. It was nice seeing you again after I don't know how many years. Thank you very much. That's it. Rumat, over to you.
Thank you, Ma'am Kathy, for those wonderful words. I might have missed a few housekeeping rules. Apologies for that. I would gently ask that all cell phones be on silent. If it rings, I'm still a youth, and I like to go to Kailija or Nyanga over the weekends and go for a braai. If your phone rings, you would kindly drop your 50 rand on a cookie jar so that I can go and have a braai. I thank you. And then without further ado, I would like to bring or call upon the next speaker, our guest of honor, Alderman Eddie Andrews. I think he does not need much of an introduction. He's a very friendly person. That's what I picked up in my engagements with him, and he's quite supportive in the sector, and we thought he would be the best person to speak around the small-scale rental sector. I welcome you, Alderman.
Thank you. Chuma, I'm seated next to the maker member of finance, and this desire that you have to solicit money from us for your recreational activities over the weekend, we're really keen to ensure that it's properly audited. So it has not been signed off by him. We are comfortable to consider a deviation report to depart from any MFMA obligations that we may have as a municipality as well, just to ensure that we, remain committed to our openness and transparency that we desire to seek. And so I just wanted to make that remark as well. So it's an absolute pleasure for me. That's the nice thing about Cape Town. We are able to procure good weather for you as well. So when we have these events, and this week has been filled with quite a few events that I am speaking at. Yesterday, I spoke at the NLIT conference at the Cape Town International Convention Center. And the one thing that we spoke about yesterday is just our absolute desire to ensure that Cape Town, this relocation plan that we have. I've spoken to a few people this morning. If you're visiting Cape Town for the first time, please speak to me afterwards. We have a relocation plan where we offer property at good prices, so you can relocate your residence here and also your business as well. And we have those plans for you. So please come and speak to me afterwards as well. And so welcome this morning. I think I don't want to acknowledge everyone who has already been acknowledged, but I'll just jump straight into it. And I think we understand the impact of COVID. The economic impact has been devastating. Not just impacting on corporate South Africa, where they had to reduce their staff complement, look at different ways of doing business, whether it be in or out of office, hybrid working solutions. We also understand that the impact, governments have not been immune to the economic impact of COVID as well. You've seen the recent report, which municipalities are operating financially viably. I think we don't want to go into detail there, but it's a concern. And unfortunately for us in Cape Town, we've got an amazing team and head by Siseko, where we are operating in a responsible manner when it comes to the purse of the city of Cape Town. And so that's important to us, because if you're unable to have a stabilized government, then what are we able to do? The instability will not prevent you from implementing key programs that you should be implementing. And the last impact that I want to talk about would be the impact on our residents. I think you've seen the prices of fuel increased. You see the basic bread and butter items that have increased over the past period. And the impact is devastating. And so whenever we get a request as government to look at your tariff structure, whether it be how we procure energy, or whether it be in terms of our, even a basic booking of a municipal facility, there's always that risk of, burdening the consumer, the end consumer, with the increase that we are proposing. And so those are sort of just highlighting the problem and the economic impact currently. But we'd be failing in our obligation as government to look at what should we be doing to ensure that we respond to those concerns. And underpinned of every single solution should be the growth of the economy. If the economy does not grow, then people will not have employment opportunities, businesses won't invest, there won't be expansions, and also looking at new economies that we need to pursue as well. And so against that backdrop, it's an absolute pleasure to every time I engage on this program to say you have a strong supporter from me and also the city of Cape Town. We don't loosely use the word game changer, but we see this particular program as a game changer. Because developed market goes where market goes. And so sometimes government, you lead, and sometimes we're in the middle somewhere, and sometimes we're running behind. And in this particular context, we find ourselves a bit of both, leading in between all three, and also running behind at times with our legislation that we're looking to reform to enable this sort of development. So I think that is important to know, because we understand the impact of urbanization. More than half of the world is the population living in cities. And so we acknowledge that and the impact of urbanization. It burdens municipalities. But we have to ask the question, what is our response to urbanization? And that's why a couple of years ago, we've changed our payoff line from the city that works for you to making progress possible together. Because this shared future that you and I and those who are not here today have, it requires a collaborative effort to ensure that we operate in a sustainable manner. Because if we don't do that, there won't be a tomorrow. There won't be the necessary investment into our infrastructure. There won't be the necessary investment to ensure that our economy grows, and there won't be sufficient employment opportunities. So the impact of urbanization, people come to cities because they see there's an opportunity. And so now, whilst they are here, they need accommodation and they need a place to stay. And whilst they get the opportunity and become a lot more employable, and of course, move into a particular income bandwidth where they can, of course, finance the purchase of a home. So we understand that. And we have to ask the question as government, what should we do to enable that? And I think Kathy made a very important point, and I don't think it's unique to Cape Town. Cape Town is not uniquely unequal. I think as a country, we're the most unequal country globally. So in Cape Town, we're acknowledging that, but we're really asking our question, what should we do to mitigate the impact on the end user? Because ultimately, we don't want to further perpetuate the poverty cycle. That's the bottom line. And so the economic imperative is absolutely important. So over and above procuring good weather for you, I think what we're also keen to do, and our purpose is clear and simple. We don't hide from the fact that we've got a very ambitious agenda, and we aim to achieve every single objective that we've set out to the past 6 months. There are basically 7 objectives, and I think most of you would be familiar with them. End load shedding over time, ensure that we have a safer city, how we deal with our property matters and releasing state-owned land to the public, in terms of ease of doing business. We're just all things that are very important to us. The cleaning of our water bodies, our rivers, our canals, our fleas. Those are all aspects that are really important to us, and making sure that we digitalize our service delivery portal so the basic person on the street with a smartphone can access and register a service request without needing data. And so those are all reforms that we are pursuing, and some we will achieve, and where we have in Afrikaans, the best way to describe what our hakplek is, we will fight. We will fight to achieve that particular objective. We will also litigate to achieve that particular objective. And we're very happy to consider the devolution of whatever function that there may be to ensure that we are the drivers of economic growth in the city of Cape Town. It's a global understanding and appreciation of that. Cities contribute towards economic growth. So the city of Cape Town should be the leaders in that as well, and healthy public transport systems. In the city of Cape Town, our purpose is very clear. We need to improve the living conditions of our poorest residents. We need to roll back poverty. We need to spread opportunities. We need to grow our economy. We need to deliver excellent basic services to inspire optimism. And we need to be an example to the rest of South Africa. And that example is what good, competent governance looks like. We spoke about importance of a stable government. Without stability, you won't be having any issues, or you may have issues where you find some dollars under your mattress. So during this term of, sorry, apologies, these thoughts just come out of my, I'm so sorry. I sincerely apologize. Apologies to the colleagues if that's your political persuasion. So during this term of office, we have set ourselves this very ambitious agenda to inspire that particular hope. Cape Town desires to be a city of hope. Here in Cape Town, we are moving boldly to protect our residents from the failures of other spheres of government or other state-owned entities. And these bold moves confirm our commitment to our residents. And as I mentioned earlier on, it includes ending load shedding over time, ensuring that Cape Town is a lot safer, because to ensure investor confidence, we need to have a safer city. And so that's why the boots on the ground are so important to us. But I think in Cape Town, just to underscore this point, and I've made this remark a few times already, we have the necessary political stability, policy certainty, and I think most of you in the room would appreciate that, but more importantly, confidence in our administration to implement. So there's no paralysis here in Cape Town. We know exactly what we want to do. We know exactly how we're going to do it, but more importantly, most of those objectives are budgeted for. And so, but we're also mindful that there are a lot more people on the housing waiting list than there are housing opportunities. So we also acknowledge that, and the growth of our informal settlements, how it burdens our infrastructure and just sort of lengthens the waiting list. The need for basic services, that particular ask has been stretched, whether it is infrastructure, whether it be additional trucks to collect your refuse. it definitely places both an operational and financial burden on the city of Cape Town. And so looking at a solution, we have to see where is the demand for affordable rental accommodation. And so I think the research is clear. In 2020, we know what has been happening for the better part of a decade. So we as an enabler now and as a regulator, we have to ask ourselves, how do we catch up with this? So in 2020, the City of Cape Town's full council approved recommendations intended to enable property owners in less formal areas to develop small-scale rental accommodation that is affordable and complies with the national building regulations. So we understand the importance and appreciate the importance of compliance to ensure that we have structurally sound buildings developed. And so we don't have the building collapsing, and of course, the impact of that is devastating. And so our desire to run towards and to make progress possible together catapults us into conversations that the additional municipalities are not part of. And so we run towards, so earlier this year in February, I hosted a meeting with the developers sector and those involved both in big and small scale development. In particular, the small scale team were also invited to attend and they were present because we understand the demand for affordable housing is in less formal areas is huge and growing year on year. So this creating new economies, I was at the recent celebrations of PPC, the cement company, and they said to me, Eddie, do you know where we deliver most of our cement? I said, no, please inform me. This is our informal areas. And we have now, they have now changed their business model where you don't need to buy a certain percentage of bags of cement. You can now buy a small gogo buying 10 bags, and you can even increase it as the need grows in your particular area. So market understands that. And I think I wanted to underscore the importance thereof. And so an in-depth analysis in 2020 of the small-scale rental market in Khayelitsha found the market is thriving, and most of you would know that, despite any assistance from or lack of assistance from government. This market is driven by private individuals who develop rental opportunities on their land, either by extending their homes or by adding separate rooms or structures. These additions are both formal and informal. And I think just to highlight again, following that study, the City of Cape Town Council approved a report in September 2020 that concluded that we should consider incentives for private property owners in incremental housing zones to assist with the provision of affordable rental accommodation. And I think following this report, we have made great progress over the past 18 months to develop those initiatives to stimulate this trend, to make it easier for individuals in incremental housing zones to pursue these types of developments. And so the progress to date is, one, a report on the proposed overlay zone to identify areas appropriate for small-scale rental units has been circulated to sub-councils for their input and comment, and the importance thereof. So we appreciate that sort of development, and we are not fined ridiculous sums of money when the developments goes up. A menu of prototypical building plans for small-scale rental units have been drafted and are now being developed. Once concluded, the landowner will be able to select a plan for this menu and to submit it to the city in terms of the national building regulations. A review is underway to determine the development contributions payable by those developing small-scale rental units. So we don't want to paralyze your development by having these unnecessary high development charges, but we're seeing how we can further assist you there. And the city has entered into a memorandum of understanding with registered financial institutions, making development finance available to the sector. The city has committed to supporting the rollout of an academy where contractors and developers can be trained. Apart from assisting and encouraging the developers, this is also intended to empower small-scale entrepreneurs across the city to use their properties to generate an income. All about the economic imperative. The city is working in partnership with DAG, Human Research Council, and financial institutions to promote and assist the interest of this very important sector. By investing in the properties, the small-scale rental landlords can become owners of an on-site long-term capital asset that will grow in value over time. And these units, these units should comply with the national building regulations, which is in the interest of the health and safety of the tenants. And the city wants to ensure that the units will comply with our standards to connect to services such as water, electricity, and sewage. Why is that important? It's important because if we don't know who's connecting to the grid, we don't know what future capacity that we may need. And so hence the compliance is really important to those engineering departments. So I want to conclude by saying again, this is a game changer. You have political champions and you have an absolute commitment from our side to do whatever we need to do to further enable what is happening currently. We support and will continue to create an enabling environment for all entrepreneurs, as we all appreciate the importance of the economic imperative. Because Cape Town desires to be known as a place where you can live, work, play, but also invest. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alderman, for those words. I think I can attest to say the city of Cape Town is quite far ahead compared to other metros in terms of being progressive and supporting the small-scale rental housing sector. I think, yes, it's happening across the country. Areas like Joburg, hence we see so many finance institutions all over the country. But in terms of progressiveness and being publicly to say we are supporting it and we're supporting the initiative, I think it's something that I can attest to and say it's happening and you guys are progressive. Thank you very much, Alderman, for those words. And then I think the next speaker is my mentor, Grootman Dazet. We've been in the trenches trying to pick up the CDA. I think for years now, we've seen the fruition of your hard labor. He'll be setting out the context in terms of why, how the CDA works, the context of the small-scale rental sector. Yeah, thank you, Dazet.
Okay, thank you, Koma. Morning, everyone. Morning, colleagues. Colleagues from the city of Cape Town. I can be proud to say they are colleagues. I think we are in the trenches together. Acknowledging everyone who's here today. My name is Zama Mgwaju. I'm the program manager at DEG. DEG was started back in 1986. There's founding members of DEG. Some have passed. I hear that there's one who's here today, Simon Nicholas. I hear that he's here today. Thank you very much. The initiative that you started back in 1986, I think is still live. I think I was presenting in an international platform yesterday. I was saying our programs at DEG are talking to the realities on the ground. They are influenced by what the communities are calling for. So I think I won't say much about DEG. I think everyone knows DEG, but I think some people will know DEG as a PHP organization. We've done a lot regarding PHP. I think between 2011 and 2017, we led a project in Kailicha, unblocking of PHP projects, whereby we unblocked 2173 houses. That's when the idea of CDA was born. That's when at DEG we chose, I always say, we like to travel a road less traveled. We chose a road less traveled. We were given 67 million to deliver 273 houses in Kailicha, and we chose the difficult route of working with emerging construction companies. It was difficult. We started with 14, and I think we finished with like 5 or so. But those 5 that we finished with, some of them today are CITB creating 4 construction companies. They are employing people on a full-time basis. Some have even went as far as going back to the Eastern Cape or other provinces and not to wait for a container to be in Kailicha and they fight for the 30% that they don't even understand at times. So I think that's when our CDA was born. Then myself, I think just to say, I joined the DEG in 2005. I was still young then. I was an intern, and I've been at DEG since 2005. working on the trenches, working with different communities, better understanding how we can partner with communities so that they can lead their own development. I'm going to talk about the realities. I think a lot has been done since 1994 in terms of delivering houses in South Africa. I think the first democratic government, 1994 to 1999, 1 million houses were delivered. Don't ask me where were they delivered, but they were delivered. And then we've got, then there were changes in policy. I think in 2004, BNG was put into place, and there was a change in the name of the department from the Department of Housing to Department of Human Settlements, creation of sustainable human settlements. Whereby I always say you can give Zama a house, but Zama is not going to eat a house. What else are you providing so that I cannot be tempted to sell the house, so that I cannot be tempted to rent the house and go back to an informal settlement? So yeah, different programs have been implemented by government. I think RDP, BNG, informal settlement upgrading. I think we've got social housing institutions in Cape Town, in Joburg, all over the country. But unfortunately, if you go to communities in Cape Town, the townships in Cape Town, yes, you'll find social housing institutions in Mitchell's Plain, but you don't find social housing institutions in Langa, in Khayelitsha, one of the biggest townships in Cape Town, Kraaifontein, Delft. There's no social housing institutions there. The question is, what about those who will never qualify for an RDP type of a house? What about those who will never qualify to get a bond from the traditional banks? Where are they going to live? In the last few months, I started to talk about boxes. I think these are boxes that were created by our policymakers. I think we've got an RDP house. One should fit into that particular box. To fit into that particular box, you have to earn 3,000 rands combined and below, if you are a household. Then the social housing programs. We know we've been calling for that within the inner city. Not everyone would qualify for the social housing program. I think the banks, I think there's this idea in our mind as South Africans that there's this ladder. Someone will stay in an informal settlement, then he'll get an RDP house, then he'll move the ladder up until he buys a bond finance house. But recently, in the past 5 years, we've seen the opposite happening. We've seen a lot of invasions, people selling RDP houses, backyard dwellers being forgotten. There was COVID-19 in the last 2 years. So unemployment rate is going up. There's Woodstock Hospital, we know what is happening there. So a lot is happening. And for us, this calls for us to look at the boxes that were created back in 1994 and to say, what are the solutions that we can come up with that will talk to the realities of 2022 going forward? Okay, I think I started to say the idea of CDA around 2017 when we completed the PHP projects that we're doing in Khayelitsha and Philippi. And by then we started to see individuals building houses and building at the back of their houses. Some of their houses are not up to scratch. I always say the bad and the good is happening with the CDA or without the CDA. People are not waiting for the CDA to come and capacitate them. People are not waiting for the city of Cape Town to put together the overlay zones or just to declare, I'm not a planner. I studied politics at university. And for me, some of these guys who are building are also not planners, are also not architects. They are seeing an opportunity. Some of them are saying, I don't want backyard shacks at the back of my house. I want to build formalized units. And some started to build with their own finance. There's a friend of mine who was a taxi owner. He started to sell. He was heartful of what was happening in the taxi industry. He said to me, okay, Zama, I want to move out of the taxi industry. Then he sold his taxis and he built flats. Up until some of the finance institutions started to come in and finance. But these are the realities, the good and the bad is happening. While we are here today, someone is thinking about building a flats. I remember during December holidays, while I was home in an activity, someone called me to say, look, Zama, I hear that you support people who are building flats. Then I said, wait until January. Then by January, when I started to talk about building plans and everything else, that guy ran away. He never called me up until today. Maybe his flat is up now. He never wanted to speak to me because I spoke about building plans to say, look, you are not in Ngamakwe here, you're not in Kimberley, you're not in a rural area. You have to build within building standards. Here's a plan, this is how we can support you. Then he said, maybe he thought that I'm gonna be delaying him. Then he left. So I wanna say, while we are here today, while we are busy with different officials from the city of Cape Town crafting solutions, people are building. I think I've spoken about this. The boat is moving. We are chasing the boat now. And we need to be strategic in chasing the boat. The city alone will not be able to catch that boat. How do we, as different partners within the sector, strategize together regarding the solutions that we want to see? Because at the end of the day, we don't also want to distract what these guys are doing. Okay, I think I spoke about the low road. I think if you look at that research, it says, how do we move from a low road to a high road? I think that famous builder, I don't know even the owner of that building, maybe where he is, he's very ashamed because that picture has been used million times. I don't know what he was doing there. But for me, those things are happening. I stay in Delft myself, closer to the flats, closer to the Symphony Clinic. People are building there inside courtyards, building rental units. And how do we start to engage with those individuals? Because I always say when I speak, we don't want to see many Danuns. In Danun, I've got friends and family staying in Danun. At times you'll see a transformer inside someone else's living room. And you ask yourself, what is this transformer doing here? So we don't want to see other Danuns in other areas. And how do we start to cooperate? How do we start to work together towards moving from the low road to the high road? I think the team there was in Orlando. This is a beautiful unit. I think that site visit was facilitated by Usis Lusanda from TAF. Beautiful development in Orlando. That's the high road. That's where we want to see ourselves. Who are these developers? I think we work with different types of developers. There's developers who are saying, I don't want any money from the finance institutions. I don't want even, or they don't even do any plans. They just build at the back of their houses using maybe rough money, using maybe their savings, their hoy-hoys, and they build. And then there are those we call homeowner developers. But there's two types of homeowner developers. Other homeowner developers will say, I want to build according to the plans, but I'm going to build once. I'm not going to repeat the development. And I'm going to build at the back of my house and I'll stay there in that RDP house that I got. But then there's another type of developers, those that we say they are entrepreneur type developers. It's those developers who will see an opportunity in Delft, they will develop in Delft, demolish the RDP house in Delft, and they build. They go to another area, they go to another area. Those are the developers who will go to the likes of Umastandi, who will go to the likes of Bitprop. I build to raise finance. And these types of developers will need different types of support. When we speak to the finance institutions, we always say, how do you customize your financial packages so that they can talk to the needs of these different types of developers. I think this was already mentioned by Alderman Eddie. We were very excited, Alderman, when the city passed these resolutions, August 2020, in the middle of the COVID. And we said as DEG, we cannot just sit and wait. How do we start to engage not only the city of Cape Town, but other sectors? I think I'm tempted to mention Charles Rodman. I'm tempted to mention him. He has done a lot for the sector. At times, when I will speak to him, I could feel that he's alone. Not anymore, yes. I can feel that also, that he's not alone anymore. But during those times, I felt that, hey, he's alone. But for me now, I think he's always engaging. He's always saying, what do you think? What about this? How can we co-create? Because he's aware that whatever we are going to be coming up with, it should talk to the realities on the ground. So I think, well done. I think we are looking forward, Charles, and the team, Erica, to work with your department and the human settlements, because I always say we cannot only work with one directorate within the city of Cape Town. How do we work with different directorates? For example, we are talking overlay zones. They are done by one directorate and the prototype plans. But if we are talking about issues of finance, payment of the fees and the development charges, then finance department should also be on board. So I think we are happy at DEG. I think the engagements are happening, and we are bringing TDF also to those engagements. TDF, which is Western Cape Township Developers Forum. Because I always say to them, even with communities on the ground, informal settlement communities, when I go and engage with them, I always say, I'm not staying in an informal settlement. Even with developers, I always say, I'm not a developer. I cannot always go to public platforms and say, this is what you want. Stand up so that you as developers, you can start to engage and put your position forward. And for me, luckily for us, I think there's a forum that was, formed, early this year. CDA. What is it that CDA is doing? CDA is a programmatic area within DEG that was started back in 2017, formalized in 2018. And Kuma is the coordinator of CDA. What we do in CDA, I think before COVID-19, we'll do what we call information sessions, whereby we'll go to different townships and talk about if one wants to be a fully fledged developer, what does that mean? If someone wants to be a fully fledged construction company, what does that mean? We'll engage with our forums so that they can better understand the support that will come from CDA. Then the other thing that we have done since 2017 is training of construction companies. Remember the unblocking in Kailicha, some of the people who dropped along the way. Then we said we need a formalized training program for contractors. Because once you secure, once a developer secures money from TAF, from Umastandi, they will want finance, they will need a fully fledged construction company. And we've been doing that since 2017 in partnership with a lecturer from UCT Construction Management who also understands how to work with emerging construction companies. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but that's Amanda Mtya. And then our engagements with the developers, we also saw a gap. And this year we started a developer course that is going to give someone the idea of what is it to be a developer? Identification of opportunities, understanding the city processes, understanding how to raise finance and property management. And that particular course was started this year, facilitated by Rob and Professor Francois Verelo. So, and then we do sector coordination, whereby we engage with different actors so that, because we are saying not one entity is responsible for this particular sector. And then I think for me, vetted professionals, architects, planners, because at times they are throwing, I think, other developers under the bus. I'm just finishing now, Toma. And then for me, I'm saying, let us take care of this sector. How to, I think there's no need for a one-size-fits-all. Hence, I spoke about different developers. How do we make sure that we understand this sector? These guys are creating social value through the provision of affordable housing. And how do we start to support the initiatives that they have started? I think these are just some pictures. Before I close, Toma, I think this one is very important for me. I think here we are saying the developer is in the middle there. How do we start then to speak? I think we're already doing this as a DEG, coordinating these different players. For example, there's CDA there, there's emerging construction companies, there's finance institutions, different packages, and HBRC. Their systems, unfortunately, are not talking to this sector. How can NHBRC change their systems so that it can talk to this sector? Built environment professionals. Dion from Western Cape Development Forum. Since day one, when we started to engage with him back in 2017, he saw a potential in this particular sector. And I think 2 weeks back, CDA and TTF was represented as speakers in their forum. And they've said to us, they are willing to play a mentoring role. Local sphere of government, they've got a role to play. I think national government and provincial governments. Provincial government, the tribunal. We are saying we are creating these affordable opportunities. There will be fights there. Where's the rental tribunal? And the DEG, we've started to engage with them. And we are rolling information sessions with the tribunal. National government, we are talking about infrastructure improvements. Where are the grants that can also start to support? I think we're also saying creation of sustainable human settlements, issues of safety, issues of social amenities, local economic opportunities. But then we're saying this is not a silver bullet. I think this is my last slide. I think in this slide, I think I'll just have to read here. This graphic shows that the sector goes beyond building houses. To get to the high road scenario, the city and us need to make sure that we are building sustainable neighborhoods. Applying the concept of land value capture will be essential to this. I think Helen can speak more about that. In the short term, that means recognizing the social value brought by the micro developers which are building affordable housing and enabling such investment with infrastructure delivery and social amenities. I think there's an opportunity not only for the micro developers, but also for the finance department from the side of the city in terms of rates and taxes. I think, Kuma, let me stop there. I think I started to say we took a road less traveled. This is not a road less traveled anymore. We've been there in the trenches with some officials, with some stakeholders outside of the city, with the developers themselves. And how do we start to co-create? And for me, I'm saying, let us avoid unnecessary challenges in the future. Let's dirty our hands now. I think I heard, I was not around in the 60s. I heard that the taxi industry started in the 60s and our government looked the other way. And you look at the taxi industry now, it's like that. That's another unknown in this sector. And we don't want other unknowns. Thank you very much, Toma. Oh, the other stakeholder. that I forgot to mention is we commissioned the research. I think Professor Ivan is gonna talk about the recommendation of the research. But as part of the team, there was Ivan outside of DEG, there was Andreas, I think who's online, and then there's Claire from BitProp. Thank you very much for agreeing to partner with us. We know we have been difficult at times, but I think the products that we are delivering today, wow, I'm very excited. Thank you very much.
There's no need for it.
No, that's great.
Okay, sure, you're sorted.
You just use the
Perfect.
arrows.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Kuma and Zama. And welcome everybody today. It's great to see so many of you here with us, and of course to have the people online as well. It's a real pleasure to talk to you this morning about this research, which we really enjoyed doing. Also want to thank the Deputy Mayor for being with us and staying on. It's great to have you with us, and really appreciated your remarks about this and the support the city is offering. This is really important. We feel this is a very important time in the development of small-scale rental housing, and we need to capture the moment so that we spread the good message beyond Cape Town to other cities and to national government. We need national support to realize the full potential of this phenomenon. This was a real team effort, as has already been indicated. So we really appreciated working with DAG. The passion, the enthusiasm, the professionalism as well of DAG must be mentioned as excellent partners to work with. BitProp, in the form of Claire de Treveau, played an important role in the research. And my colleague, Andres Sheba, actually led the work and was the principal author of the report. He is online. Unfortunately, he's away on sabbatical, so can't be with us in person. So it was a teamwork, team effort, and we couldn't have done it without not just the staff from DAG, Zama, Kuma, Helen, and Claudia, but also the networks that DAG have. And I think this point was emphasized by Zama, but it's really important. DAG is a really well-connected organization, and those networks are invaluable in sharing knowledge, in understanding what's happening on the ground, lending legitimacy to work that other organizations do. It can't be overemphasized how important this is. We also benefited enormously in this work from advice of experts in this city. People outside the city authority, academics, researchers, consultants, and of course, a number of important officials in the city too were really helpful in giving us insights into the work that's ongoing and enabling us, engaging with us in a spirit of cooperation for us to comment on that work and to make some recommendations how it can be taken further. So, without further ado, let's try and move on to the next slide. It's a bit stuck. Double click. Okay, great. So simplifying, the two basic questions we posed in this work. What stops emerging developers from following government regulations? We all recognize it's important that they comply with standards, procedures, bylaws in the way that's already been explained, the importance of this. And I'll emphasize this point because it's important.
But we need a better understanding of why they don't. Why do they do what Zama says? They proceed. They're in a rush. They're in a hurry. It's not, the reasons are quite important to understand, okay? And the second one, what can be done about that, especially at the city level, where we have control over this? So that was our focus. And putting it, as I'll go on to emphasize, we do need to think about simplifying and streamlining these regulations, make it easier for people to comply. We've also got to support developers who don't have the knowledge and wherewithal to comply. We've got to help them to cross these hurdles. But we've also got to think about the wider physical and social environment. Our townships are very tough places, right? And in some of them, it's kind of almost anarchy. So we have to think about that very tough context, because you're not just going to get people to comply by working at the level of individual developers and persuading them to comply. The environment is toxic in some cases, and we need a better grasp of how we're going to shift from these tough environments to the high road of sustainable, safe, livable, decent, dignified living environments. I'm jumping too quickly. Sorry, Claudia. Let's go back. Another one. Yeah. So the evidence base, essentially we talked to detailed interviews with 30 experts in the city and outside. We had long interviews with 21 developers across the range that Zama talked about, from homeowner developers to more experienced micro developers. We looked at Bitprop's practical experience of their own projects. We looked at the costings. We looked at the rents that were being generated to understand something about the costs of compliance, and I'll say much more about that. We had a couple of workshops with stakeholders, bringing people together to discuss preliminary conclusions and to get feedback from people as to where we were going. And we looked at all the documents and evidence that's in the public domain. So 5 main findings and then 7 recommendations I'm going to take you through. The first main finding is that it's very hard to find any rental unit that is fully compliant in our townships, right? They are not compliant, they're not authorized, they're informal to different degrees. Despite that, there are many positive effects of these developments, despite them being non-compliant. We've heard about this already. I'm not going to elaborate. They're providing lots of affordable rental accommodation. They respond to demand. We've heard from Zama, these developers are closely attuned to conditions in the township. They know what people can afford. They know what standards people are looking for. They're responding to demand. They're adaptive and flexible. They do shift the products that are provided according to how well they're received. It's spontaneous. People are doing it and getting on with it. And it's a very dynamic phenomenon. And I think this is what attracts many people to this whole phenomenon, that it's bottom up, it's grassroots driven, it's responsive, and it stands in quite a big contrast to some of our national housing programs. So there are many positive aspects to it, but there are also significant drawbacks. The fact it's non-compliant means that it prevents long-term borrowing. It prevents insurance in many cases of these buildings. Developers can't borrow the kind of cheaper finance that they need and that you can get to build or buy your own home. It hampers long-term investment horizons, right? Because the funding is predominantly short-term. It also stops people lending. So we know of a number of microfinanciers who are desperate to provide the funding for these developers, but who will not and can't do it because it's not compliant. And one of them has 50 million rand that they've created a fund for, but it's sitting idle because these projects are not unauthorized. Developers, because of the funding available, they cut corners to save costs. Sometimes it's not a big problem. Sometimes it risks the safety of buildings. They encroach often on public and private spaces. It creates health and safety hazards when the infrastructure starts to collapse or the connections aren't properly made or buildings are unsafe. The pressure on public infrastructure because of, as the Deputy Mayor was saying, when these connections are not authorized, it creates all kinds of problems, which are pretty obvious to imagine. The effect of this is that the value of the property that, again, the Deputy Mayor emphasized, is constrained by the fact that this is not authorized, right? So the property is not realizing its full potential, and the city is not generating any revenue from these properties. So it's unsatisfactory from a sort of commercial or a value point of view, because it's not realizing the potential of the investment that's being made in terms of the assets being generated. So at worst, it does risk the low road of overcrowding, insecurity, mistrust between developers and the city, as we've already heard, and instability in these communities where people really are uncertain about their projects. They were aware that they are illegal, and at worst, they risk being demolished by the city because they're non-compliant. So that's not a stable, secure environment in which assets are increasing in value over time. And just some of my examples. On the left is my Zama equivalent of the building. This top picture was taken a year before the one below. This building is financed purely by the income from the rent of the owner, right? So as they build another room onto the property and start earning rent from that room, they can afford to ultimately put another room on top, right? But there's no building plan at the outset. It's higgledy-piggledy. Look at the staircases to access the second, third floors. It's supported by odd beams here, left, right, and center. And when we visited this area with a city official, he said, this building has to be demolished. I don't think it has yet been demolished. This is difficult for the city to go into these communities and demolish. It'll cause a riot, right? So, but this is clearly not a good way to build solid rental blocks of flats. Building over the servitudes, over the pavements, is also, this place is actually blocking the road. So emergency vehicles and other access is not possible. So this is not the way to build decent, dignified neighborhoods. The second major finding, these obstacles are linked, right? It's not a single problem. It's a multiple linked problems which inhibit compliance, which make this a complicated issue to deal with, which is why I think the city has taken some time to get where it has, and why other cities are still behind the curve. Kind of too complex to go there, right? The first one is that there are issues about the developers, their understanding, their awareness, their resources, their capabilities to follow the rules. Secondly, there are problems with the rules as well. The regulations and standards and the procedures to apply for permission are very complex and cumbersome. And so it puts people off. This time, people know it's going to take a long time to get permission. There is also issues about the interpretation of the rules and the application. And there are stories of different interpretations in different district offices of the city, where some officials are generous, take a flexible interpretation. Others are much more stringent and tougher in the interpretation. And of course, there are staff shortages which delay the application of the procedures as well. In addition, the fourth major problem, there are some fundamental preconditions, namely title deeds or ownership. For the whole system to work in the city, the developer has to own the property, right? In order to even to submit a building plan. This is critical to taxing, to charging rates of the property owner. The whole system hinges on the existence of title deeds. But there are many, many properties where these title deeds don't exist for all sorts of understandable reasons and for all sorts of administrative failures as well. People don't have their title deeds. So it's wrong just to blame the property owners if they don't have their title deeds, because often they weren't transferred at the time that the RDP or B&G houses were given over to the occupier. There are at least 25,000 of these, and it's a big, big hurdle, because without them, nothing else can follow. So developers either don't apply at all, we've heard about that, or they start the process and they give up after a few months out of frustration. Or, and this is also stories about developers submitting incorrect, gaming the system in order to try to hoodwink officials to give them approval, and then they develop and build something a little bit different. The third major finding is that the system is too restrictive. The regulatory system or the regime is too restrictive. And I just want to elaborate a little bit further on some of the things I said. So the planning regulations basically provide very little scope for blocks of flats in townships. And this is why the overlay zone is so important. It's simply, you can build an extra 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 units in your backyard, but you can't build a block of flats of 8 or 10 or 12 units. That's too much. Secondly, the building standards are often excessive and the specifications unrealistic. These building standards are, I was looking at the manual actually last night, and I came across an interesting quote. The building standards date back to 1990. They were introduced. They were overhauled in 2008. And there's a wonderful phrase to explain why they were overhauled in 2008. And it talks about the introduction of a much more complex building control system, right? So that was an objective in 2008, to introduce a more complex building control system. That is not an objective, right? So there are challenges. I'm not an expert on building standard, but there are people in the room who know much more than I do, can give examples. Thirdly, in fact that these development charges to pay for the infrastructure, the additional infrastructure required for blocks of flats, have to be paid upfront before there's ever any revenue generated, is a big inhibitor for developers. The contributions are prohibitive, and this is a significant hurdle. The procedures for applying, never mind the standards and the specifications, the very procedures, the amount of paperwork and documents required when a developer submits their plan is enormous. Plus, of course, there's a fee to be paid. And if there's anything small wrong with the paperwork, it has to go back and be redone, the draft, the drawings, etc., that accompany the plan. The inconsistent interpretation of the rules by different officials I've mentioned. The decision-making can take the fact that the decision goes to different departments of the city, one by one, inviting them to raise objections. It would be much more sensible as a sort of naive outsider if there could be the decision could be taken place in parallel. If everybody, putting it simply, sat around the table and said, we've got this application for a block of 8 units in Khayelitsha. What are the biggest problems with it? Let's try and find a solution and let's reach a decision straight away, right? Not nitpick by each department raising its objections in turn, which takes enormous amount of time. There are shortages of qualified officials, so they can't afford to provide guidance and support to developers coming into the office and saying, we need some help. What will you allow me to build in this place? Excessive delays and high costs for developers is the consequence of that. So a few quotes from developers. No, I didn't submit because I didn't know about building plans, okay? The municipality is very slow, and this gets people angry. People then decide to go ahead and build anyway and submit building applications later. Wow, okay, retrospective. Currently, you only know that it's not allowed when you're getting a fine. Everyone wants to build a flat but doesn't know the procedure. You only know the procedure when someone is asked to demolish because he built over the boundary lines. Oh dear. This is the wrong way about it, isn't it? It's not the way you regulate effectively. Fourth main finding, the ability to comply varies by type of developer. And Zama made this point very well, so I don't need to elaborate. The knowledge and information they have, their technical capabilities, the resources, the networks, the resourcefulness of developers obviously varies enormously. We've got the typology. So I think I agree that we need different responses. One size fits all. The city likes one size fits all, but we need to find a better way, I think, to engage with developers. A few more views. A lot of building happens with or without the city's approval. That has to do with the lack of visibility of the city. And these developers not having a platform to engage the city to say, guide us what we can do. Interesting, insightful comment. They want to talk, but there's nobody behind the door, behind the desk. I don't think the formal system offers very much. It's all circular. So if people aren't going to formalize, then the city is not going to govern, then the financial system won't participate, and you're going to have areas of the city that are just no-go areas, right? And this is this interlinked nature of the problem. This is the low road. If we don't find a way through this quagmire of complications, we end up with slums. Last major finding, the costs of compliance for these homeowner incremental developers more than doubles their current development costs. If you make them go through all the hoops, it more than doubles what it's going to cost them. Many other types of developers have partial compliance. So there are quite a number of projects with approved building plans, but they haven't gone the whole hog of getting rezoning and getting some of the other requirements. Let's just take you through a little bit about the costs and benefits of compliance. So there are three scenarios that we worked through with BitProp's data, which we then verified with the CDA, Contract and Developer Academy, people with expertise on these matters. So the limited compliance, these are the homeowner developers that just get on with it, right? They cut corners by just using a draftsperson, not a qualified architect. They use bucky or informal builders to build cheaply. They use cheap building materials, not standard specified approved building materials. They cut corners on the structure of the building in various ways, on the ceilings, on the roofs, on the stairways, access points, and so on. They're reliant on short-term ad hoc funding, and this forces them into these short-term cost cutting. The development cost for them typically for a block of 6 rental units would be around 600,000 Rand. For that, they could expect to get monthly rent of roughly 2,000 Rand. The partial compliance developers, they use architectural technicians rather than fully qualified architects. They employ an engineer to ensure that the structural integrity of the building is sound, and that helps to get building approval. They avoid rezoning or development charges because these are just too prohibitive, so they go part way. They register the site with the NHBRC. They apply for a second connection from Tescom for the electricity. The quality finishes are reasonable in these buildings. They're trying to make sure it's a decent product. And they manage to secure a loan from a microfinance institution like TUF. Their cost might be roughly $1 million to build a block under that scenario, for which they can get a better rent because the quality is better than for the limited compliance, 2,500 to 3,200 Rand. The full compliance model, full architectural service, pays the rezoning fee, pays development charges, pays other administrative fees to the city, uses fully approved building materials, high quality finishes and furnitures and sanitary ware, long-term funding secured, charge about 1.5 million to build a block under those circumstances, and a rent of 3 to 3,600. You could see from the rent differential that it's not enormous for this much higher cost development, right? And that is the heart of the problem. They're not securing a sufficient return to justify going the full compliance route. So we compare the rents and the returns over a 20-year period, making all sorts of assumptions about the cost of finance, etc. Under a limited compliance model, the one I showed a second ago, the rental of say 2,000 a unit, the monthly profit for that developer will be roughly 6,000 for the 6 units, which amounts to an internal rate of return of about 4.6%. The partial compliance model, the rent is better, 3,000, the profit is better as a result, but the rate of return is lower because of the cost, the higher cost. And the same with the full compliance model, even bigger rental and a lower return of only 1.1% on this model, indicating barely any kind of real return. It's really not worthwhile to go this way because the rent you can generate is not going to offset that much greater cost. And with the inducements I'm going to talk about now for a few minutes, the rate of return goes up significantly if the city can make it worthwhile. And that's the key point. These recommendations, these overlay zone prototype plans bring down the cost very significantly and increase the return accordingly. So it shows this calculation that it doesn't make sense financially to comply with the rules. But with the inducements that the city can offer, becomes worthwhile. We can develop these calculations further, but this preliminary assessment indicates that really we must go down this road because it's going to make the whole thing take off and move into the higher quality compliant mode that we all recognize is important. So my recommendations, our recommendations, simplify the regulations, streamline the procedures, provide positive support to developers, and offer some financial inducements to make it worthwhile to comply. We have to think from the site level, through the neighborhood level, through the district and the citywide level when developing these recommendations. I don't have time to flesh out all the detail of it. I'm going to highlight the 7 main recommendations of the report. The first one relates to land use planning and management. So these rental units need to become a primary land use right in the communities where the demand is high, where they are well located, where the infrastructure capacity exists, and the overlay zone can deliver that, basically allowing, in principle, the development of blocks of flats instead of single residential properties. There would need to be some specified limit to the number of units can be built on, and it will vary in different places, depending on the size of the site, depending on the infrastructure capacity, the location in relation to transport nodes, etc. But in principle, this, I think, is a really important process that's ongoing, and I think the research really endorses it. Secondly, waiving upfront development charges. As I mentioned, developers say these are prohibitive, and the evidence seems to support that. Somebody has to pay. Can we recover? Can the city recover the costs from the USDG and possibly partially from these property developers in due course? It's the upfront nature. If these values, these properties are becoming more valuable, they could in due course pay higher rates, and the city could recover some of this cost in the way it normally does through the rateable revenue stream. So that's the first set of recommendations that will go a long way to helping this sector. The second one relates to building regulations. So again, we completely endorse what the city is doing to prepare prototype building plans and guidelines to give people, they're not all having to start from scratch. There are ready-made ideas for people to take off the shelf. Designs will speed up, will help developers. It will also speed up the approval process because the officials will know what they're getting from the prototypes. They won't have to scrutinize to the same extent as they would otherwise have to do. So developers less need to employ architects, engineers, and other professionals. It streamlines the whole process. In addition, we think it's really important, though, to advocate simplifying the national building regulations. Health and safety are non-negotiable, but there are all sorts of things in the complexity that are arguably luxury items, and that we can think about, not appropriate in a low-income environment where we have to try and keep the costs down of construction. More appropriate standards, lower specification, certain kinds of materials and other requirements. The city is considering applying for an exemption with a new municipal bylaw, so it doesn't have to worry about the national building regulations. That is one route to follow, of course. In terms of the country as a whole, I think we need to think about addressing the national building regulations as well. And the list of building contractors and professionals to improve the confidence and trust of developers. We think this is a good idea to develop a list so that, again, it sort of gives confidence to both developers and the city that there are professionals involved here who know what they're doing and who are not going to cut corners. Just to demonstrate the significance, the value of these reforms, the prototype plans, we reckon from our fairly rough but not completely back of the envelope calculations, will save about over 100,000 Rand for the partially compliant developers, about 12% of their development costs. For the fully compliant model, the prototype plans will save roughly double that, right? Because these are the ones who are using a full architect service, etc. So the prototype plans are a significant cost saving. For the overlay zone, it's a really big cost saving for the fully compliant developers because they're not paying the development charges, which they would otherwise pay. Roughly 35% of their costs, right? Massive saving. More modest for the partially compliant model. And then the third reform is amending the building regulations with some changes to specifications. It could save a significant amount for the fully compliant developers. So you could see the order of magnitude is significant and will make an appreciable difference to the viability and the make it worthwhile complying for these developers. In addition to these reforms, of course, we need education to show people and to make them aware that by developing an asset that's compliant and that meets clear specifications, the value of that asset will appreciate in time. And therefore, it's well worth doing it, not from a short-term cost-saving point of view, but from a long-term value asset generation point of view. The third recommendation relates to title deeds. There's no alternative really to go through this very laborious case-by-case process of rectification. I think the experience of the Center for Affordable Housing Finance, the Transaction Support Center, and the city's own work on this shows that it's a painstaking process to deal with all the problems. You have to do work site by site. But I think in addition to that, we need national action to streamline the procedures, because some of the procedures are really onerous. If somebody dies, dealing with the master's office and tracing people back to get relatives approving it, it's a formidable process that a senior official reckons there can be 25 separate steps involved in regularizing a single property. So the cost may be as much as 35 or 40,000 Rand per property to cover the charges for lawyers, administrators, and fees. That is prohibitive. This is why we've got to try and get a way of streamlining these procedures. And I'm pleased to say that Operation Vulindlela has actually taken on board this issue. How much appetite they have to deal with this remains to be seen. But CAF have done very well to get them to persuade to do this. I think there's also things the city can do themselves, some kind of interim system to recognize ownership short of full title deeds, where there's no dispute, where people have been living in the property for 5 years or whatever. The city should be able to say, we recognize you as the owner with some status. We can give you a rates bill. We can give you, you can apply for building plan approval without having to have the full title deed. There are things to be done. The city needs to be more creative in this respect. Fourth recommendation, streamline administrative procedures. Here I'm beginning to get a bit vague about the recommendation. But we've got to look at ways of trying to simplify and accelerate decision-making. Using new technology, the system is already digital, but we've got to find ways of simplifying it. And in my view, this idea of sitting around the table and reaching one decision on a development rather than the sequential reactive approach of different departments nitpicking about the fire precautions on that building, etc. That's not the way to go. You need to take a single consolidated view. Is this the building basically sound? Is it not going to fall down? What are the minor changes we might recommend rather than the other thing, as I say? The fifth recommendation, support officers. The city needs to be more visible. We've heard that on the ground. There needs to be education. If developers don't know about building plan procedures, there have to be ways of educating and informing and raising awareness of the importance of the system and of getting buy-in to the system. Practical advice and assistance, using intermediaries like DAG and other intermediaries where they're available, definitely. Those with credibility and legitimacy on the ground. But the city, I think, also needs to be more visible. Frontline officials need more discretion, so they're not constantly very cautious. Oh, I can't approve that in case, I get into trouble. Additional frontline staff. Shift some of the people from the civic center into the townships to work with people, to understand, to support, to enable development, not to tick the box and to raise objections. Sixth recommendation, we've got to build on community relationships. It's not going to work just a purely technical process. We do need to think about how we strengthen our relationship with the community. Communication, cooperation. We need stronger institutions in our poorer communities, stronger grassroots institutions that can help to strengthen the social fabric. Rights and responsibilities. It's not just a one-way agenda. People must be responsible for public realm improvements, etc. Urban management is a massive agenda, of course. To offer lease agreements, proper lease agreements, which recognize the rights of tenants who won't be evicted as soon as they lose their jobs or they can't pay the rent for a month. There have to be some protections, social protections there. And of course, the city can benefit. Rates and service charges, better accountability between citizens and the city from this new thinking about community relationships. And finally, a commitment to experimentation and learning. I think we need a different approach from a bureaucratic approach to this. It's not going to be solved by passing a resolution of the council. It needs trial and error. We need to experiment. We need to do different ways, testing what standards are appropriate and realistic, engaging with developers. Where can we improve safety and security? Where can we make some savings, right? How do we achieve progressive upgrading? It's not going to be a one overnight quick fix. How do we achieve progressive upgrading for those really bad examples? How do we get improvements without setting the bar too high that just stops development? Constructive responses to existing encroachments. This is a massive agenda where we've got problems of buildings that are on the ground that don't comply. We can't just go and demolish. How do we find compromises? How do we engage with these developments to find ways of improving the situation, rectifying retrospective approvals? And we've got to learn from what's going on at the moment. More discussion, more debate, more research, more communication to share knowledge and experience of what's happening out there. How are the funders getting on? What are their blockages to investing more in this sector? I haven't talked much about access to finance or land or infrastructure really, or institutions. I've just flagged these issues. They weren't the major focus of our work. To sum up, I think we've got to think about a two-speed approach. Gradual regularization, progressive improvements for those developers that are a long way away from compliant, and then more full formalization for those that are closer to the overcoming the hurdles, the micro developers and debt finance homeowners. We can think about full formalization for them. If we get this right, we can create this positive cycle, more livable, vibrant, valuable, and sustainable neighborhoods that will do our city proud. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ivan, for that. As you have seen that it was quite intense and detailed, and we appreciate the nuance behind the information and essentially breaking it down for us to say these are the findings and these are the recommendations that we come up with. I understand that our program said we're going to have a QIA. I think we're so passionate about the report itself that we ate a bit of time, went a bit of overboard. I'll just ask that if you have any burning questions, I've noted the questions that are online. And also, if you have any burning questions, please reserve them. We're just going to take a 40-minute break. I think the time is 10 to right now, 10 to 11. If we could just take a body break for 15 minutes and then we come back and then we initiate the panel discussion, which Alison Changa will be facilitating or moderating. And then, yeah, she can lead us in the afternoon session. Thank you very much.
Had your cup of coffee. You can come back and sit down. We have lots to discuss. My name is Alison Changana. I'm with an NGO called the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. We're up in Joburg, and you're lots of familiar faces here today, and it's fantastic to be here in person and to actually have a vibe that's more than staring at a screen. So thank you for your time. I'm going to be facilitating our discussion and our panel session now. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. In addition to Ivan and Zama, who you already heard from this morning, we have Erica Nade, who is the Director for Urban Planning and Design at the City of Cape Town, and Seth Makatuka, who is the Human Settlements Lead for the City Support Program at National Treasury. Seth. And then Masivilani Monzi, who is the Vice Chairperson of the Township Development Forum, which was mentioned this morning. And then finally, Lusanda Nishizenzi, who is with Tough 21, Trust for Urban Housing Finance, and is involved in this process as well. So we have some great experience. Both we have a voice from the city. We have, I'm going to put words into Seth's mouth and say a voice from National. We have the experience on the ground from Tough in terms of financing small-scale developers in urban areas. And we have the experience from the Township Development Forum on the ground here in Cape Town. So it should be a nice discussion to get some feedback and practical thoughts and comments on what we heard this morning. So what I'm going to do is ask the four panelists just to give us a 5-minute view on the report and the findings and whether they are feasible, whether they make sense from your own personal experience, whether they can be implemented, and whether they would have the kind of impact that has been put forward and modeled. So can I actually, I'll go in the order that we're listed. We'll have Erica and then Seth and Masivilani, and we'll finish up with Lusanda. Erica. Is that on?
Good morning, is that on?
Yes,
Cool.
great.
Thank you so much. So we are very excited to be here. I think our Deputy Mayor this morning as well spoke about the journey that we've taken since Charles really took the initiative in 2020 to get that very necessary council resolution as well. So we're very excited to be here. The Deputy Mayor also very specifically spoke about the economic benefits and other benefits of a program like this. I think being a planner in the city as well, just also to note that we see tremendous potential of this program in terms of spatial restructuring of the city, and how do we actually redevelop some of our more informal areas and try and achieve that spatial justice as well. That you know is referred to in legislation, and this is a real way for us to show how we redevelop existing areas to become that much more integrated and spatially just city as well. I think also, you know, one of the key things for us that we focused on, and we did our land use model towards the end of 2020, and that also clearly indicated the potential population growth of the city that we have to accommodate over the next 20 years. And anticipated almost 630,000 additional residential units that will be required in this time frame. But very importantly as well, that about 53% of that will be in the informal sector and not necessarily what we currently call in the formal housing market. So it became very clear to us that, you know, our planning processes, our planning regulation cannot continue to focus on what we currently deal with in terms of the more formal development areas, because we will be losing out on 53% of the future development of the city. So we have to start adjusting and adapting our own approaches and our own focus areas in order to try and catch up to the wave, I think, as Omar has put it earlier this morning. So yeah, all the suggestions that are made in the report, we support. We are currently busy with them. We are busy with the implementation of all of those. I think key for me is also to say, you know, and we didn't mention it this morning, but a monitoring and evaluation system is incredibly important. This is a learning curve for us. So as we go through and we start implementing some of these initiatives, we need to be able to monitor to understand whether it has had the desired impact or not, whether you know, it is accepted by the market or not, whether there are unintended consequences or not. You know, so for us, one of the key elements that we also want to add is obviously a monitoring and evaluation system as we implement, to be able to adapt and change as we continue. The social compacts, I think, is also key for us in terms of all the stakeholders that we need to talk to. And I know that lots of discussions have taken place, and we're very happy to have everybody here today. But I think for us as well, going forward in this discussion, it's critical to start engaging with the National Department of Human Settlements, National Treasury, and other such partners as well. The National Minister of Trade and Industry around the National Building Regulation Standards and norms, for example, because the national departments currently are not part of this conversation at all, although most of the authority to make some of these changes that are meaningful does not lie with the local authority at all. So I think it's critical that they come into the discussion as well. And then just maybe lastly to note that, you know, from the city, and Charles gets upset with me sometimes when, you know, there's such a lot of research being done around this topic, and we appreciate it, and it adds a lot of value. But I think we also really want to push towards implementation and rather learn through our mistakes and try and correct that, because we want to get out of a continuous, you know, a situation where we talk about the problem and we do research, although that is important, etc. But we really have to get to the implementation stage. So we're very excited, and we hope that you will hold our hand in that process. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Erica. I have a question for you, but I'm going to hold it. And I'll wait. Let's go ahead and hear comments from Seth.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks so much, Madam Chair. It's so encouraging to see the way in which this subsector of small-scale rental has evolved, you know, over the years. Reflecting back a couple of years back, you know, when one was growing up in the township of Guguletu, I also used to live in a backyard, you know, accommodation, you know, when I grew up. And I do have the sense and the feel of what it means, what are the challenges, you know, when it comes to backyard settlement. And although it was more of a, you know, a family arrangement, you know, that I stay at the back, which was more affordable than renting, you know, a flat, you know, in Greenpoint or in Cape Town. And I can see even right now, it remains, you know, a very viable, affordable alternative when it comes to accommodation, especially for someone who is just starting to, you know, to work. Secondly, I came across this submarket as well when I was with the city of Cape Town early, I think in after 2010, we started, I think, a backyard program in Factory 10, you know, at that time. And I basically coordinated the entire, you know, program, you know, at that time. But although the focus then was more on the public, you know, rental stock, but looking more on the infrastructure, you know, development. I'm just stating this just to say that it's a sector that is growing, and it's a sector basically that government in a way has been supporting, but not at a very desired scale that one would really like to see it being, supported. And the way in which as well, people are really, taking it seriously, in terms of modernizing, their houses and formalizing them. It's also encouraging, basically, because it's something that they are doing more privately with very minimal or no support from the, from the government. And coming back now to your question, Chair, I think this is the sector that needs to be taken, seriously by all of us. As I was just going through this subsector, basically, it's a sector, a small-scale rental, which is estimated to be having about 1.1, million, units, and most of the units, in fact, 78% of those units are mainly located, in the metropolitan municipalities. Hence, then the city support program at National Treasury has basically, prioritized this project for support, both from a technical capacity point of view, supporting the metros, and also looking basically at fiscal and financial, support that could be provided to this sector. And I'm sure some of you would have noticed that the Urban Settlements Development Grant, the USDG, is even making some provision, but very limitedly, for the support of backyard, rental, which is a small step towards the right, I think, direction. With regard to the recommendations that are coming out of the publication, firstly, I think the publication, it's a very good publication. Very good in terms of the way it has been structured, the way it has been, designed. It's a document that is easy to read, that even a lazy bureaucrat like me, in terms of reading, would not really be lazy to pick it up and read and get some ideas as to how we can reform, the sector in terms of the regulatory framework as well as the policies that need to be made. On the recommendations, I think the recommendation on the regulations, basically, especially the building regulation, I think I am in full support that we have to work on them to make them to be more flexible, and also to try and find ways and means, basically, of making the costs in terms of building, standards to be more affordable and achievable. In this regard, I would like to mention that from a Treasury and CSP point of view, we do have a program that is called Subnational Ease of Doing Business, or SNDB, Subnational Doing Business. And one of the indicators that we are working on with regard to the SNDB, program, is that basically of supporting the metros in as far as ease of doing, our business. And so from that perspective, we would really like to link up with this work that you are doing. And in terms of turnaround times with regard to building, permits, in terms of also ensuring that the building permits, especially with regard to small scale rental, are not a burden and are flexible, basically, especially for those small, scale, developers. And so we are happy to engage with you on that one. And I think it's an area that needs to be supported going forward. On the title deeds, it's a very big hindrance at this present moment. And I think that also was a very good finding. And it's one area basically that requires support as well. We also have got basically more than 1 million of properties that are locked in the backlog when it comes to title deeds, especially in our, in our metros. We have now started a program, under the Operation Vulindlela, a project to help with the communities in as far as, addressing the issue of title deed problem. But one of the issues, I think someone mentioned earlier on, if it was not Ivan, is the issue of multi-sectorial coordination, because where some of the problems are is at the Department of Justice, Home Affairs, the Department of Land and Rural Development, in terms of the blockages. And so the Operation Vulindlela is looking basically at and blocking, at the blockages at that sector, level. But at a local level, you may know, some of you, that we've also piloted with CAF and 71.4, a program that was started by through CSP, the Transaction Support Center. We also of the view that the blockages that one would really be seeing on the ground could really be, addressed through a one-stop support, that I think we need to initiate, on the ground. There is a lot that we can learn from the TSC that we piloted at Makassar. Chair, I will end there for now. I've got more to contribute, but in overall, I do support the recommendations, but key also with regard to the recommendations, I'm just putting it here that scale is very important. And so for the issue of scale, we'll need political will, we'll need the change of mindset, on the bureaucracy. That's where you normally get the blockages. And then how do we take this project, nationally? I think we also need to encourage peer-to-peer learning, cross-learning between the metros. There's a lot that they can learn from each other in as far as small-scale rental is concerned. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Seth. You've raised some really good points, and I think the reality is that the discussion around small-scale rental and backyard rental has evolved in the absence of a national policy framework that's dedicated to this. So there is not a funding stream that explicitly speaks to this with its purpose. We slotted it into the USDG, but that's not the same. Right? And there's no national policy framework. Again, National tried to do that and it didn't happen. It didn't go all the way through. So what you're seeing is an IGR issue where we have local government and provinces needing to pick up the baton and move forward in the absence of leadership at a policy level and in terms of the financial framework from national government. I'm going to shift and ask Monzi if you can speak, because your perspective is even further closer to the ground in terms of what's actually happening at the Township Development Forum. Thanks.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Well, look, I don't know where to start. Ours is quite broad. We all over. I think I will touch on first. Let me rather say thanks to you guys for hosting us. I think you've done quite an extensive and very comprehensive research on this topic. I speak as a developer, but I'm also wearing a cap as a deputy chairperson of TDF, Township Development Forum. Well, look, let me rather say the seat of Cape Town is, for a change, I mean, they've always been accused for not participating and taking part in township development. But this time around, I think there are winds of change. We can see the language is changing. There's so much energy. There's new leadership that has just assumed office a few months ago. Well, so we're happy to partner with the City of Cape Town in various developments. But let me start on a few points that I've made. I think I've made a few notes. I think COVID-19 has kind of like uncovered some cleavages of problems and of unregulated sector. We've seen some shacks actually mushroomed all over the city, not only in Cape Town, but across the country. But we are of the view that if the small developers like us were to partner with the City of Cape Town and try to address some of these challenges, the housing issues are the biggest problems in the city. And unfortunately, we can't wish away that people will not come to the city. It's a global phenomenon. It is estimated that in about 2050, half of the population in the world will actually be living in the cities. Yeah, the refocusing of the city of Cape Town is quite encouraging to recognize property developers like small ones like TTFs and others. We're also happy that at least there is a political will. As I said, in the past, there's always been, sorry, it's working, okay. There's always been some criticism level against the city of Cape Town, that they're not forthcoming as far as the plans are concerned. There will be submissions and all of that. But I must say, in the recent times that we've met some city officials like Charles, we met him few months ago. I think there is a huge change, I must be honest. Some of them are willing to work with us. They're guiding us, even when we're in the wrong side of the law. They were able to say, like, this is what you need to do, this is what you had to do. And then we managed to come up with some solutions that actually are pleasing both sides. Yeah, I'm happy if I can touch maybe on the recommendations about some incentives being promised by the city of Cape Town. We hope that this time around it's not going to be, it's not just a talk. We're looking forward to the implementations because the DC fees are quite high. Ask me, I've paid huge amount of money for DC fees. Even in terms of submitting the plans, it's a headache. You follow up, you are told that you need to submit some information, and that is why I'm saying maybe the city of Cape Town this time needs to be given some round of applause for reconsidering that there are other players in this sector like Cape Town, township developers. I think let me rather leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for Cape Town. Not just for the weather. Lusanda, you give us your thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I think on my side, firstly, thank you to DEG for the opportunity, for the invite, but especially thank you for leading the work of researching and understanding the sector. I think recommendation 9, if I remember the numbers properly, or the last recommendation, 7, about experimenting and learning. I think that's important. I think the additional word in that's needed is to say documentation, which is what DEG is doing for us. Because for us to be able to kind of bring awareness about this sector and the important contribution it's making, we need to be able to produce the evidence that we are seeing in front of us today. So thank you to DEC and obviously all the research partners, Ivan and BitProp and the rest of them that were involved in that. I think that for me, in terms of the recommendations, I agree that the recommendations are practical, but I agree that we need to focus more on whether or not they can be implemented. And sitting here as a financier who effectively has been locked out of this sector because we have to make sure that these buildings are compliant, we are sitting saying, the low road is what we know of now. The high road sounds like some sort of utopia that will be achieved in the very long term. I think in the mid road is what we need, is to recognize that currently, as the report says on page 11, I think it is, it says that there are different providers of this needed asset, which is affordable rental housing units in townships. And if you look at those different providers, in terms of the low road, you understand why the sort of homeowner landlord who needs to live off this income follows the process that they want to follow. But the mid road for me is the micro developers that have come in with big money from themselves, from their savings, and have taken the risk of taking debt financing that comes at a cost. And they are saying we want to provide quality rental accommodation in townships. I think we are already there in that mid road. We just need to make sure that we leverage it. I don't know, we support it a bit more by doing than talking, as you were saying, Erica, earlier. And I think that we need to say to ourselves, what is it that we are willing to accept in terms of the levels of densification that we want to see in townships? I mean, if you look at the cover page of the report, you can see all these single-story houses. The country can't afford to continue without densification, especially with the level of urbanization that we are seeing, especially with the level of housing demand or housing poverty, if I can call it, that we are seeing. And also, I think that we need to change our mindset to understand that housing is an economic asset, even for the user of the house, the end beneficiary who's able to access a proper unit that is having ablution facilities close to employment opportunities. That opens up an economic opportunity for that person. But the construction process as well and the management process of those assets creates jobs for people who are unable to get access to such employment. I think that there is also a level of excitement when I read about this, is it CDA at DEG that they're trying to push, especially on the side of contractors, because I think as a country, we've lost the opportunity to develop artisanal skills. And we need to start focusing on that as a sector that needs support so that we are able to create employment and we are able to support these small contractors. So I think artisanal skills is a thing that we need to look at. I think National will do well if they could look at supporting CDA to become a big training ground for artisanal skills. I think that when it comes, I wanted to speak about that last, this issue of regulations. I think this is why we are here today. That, you know, we are grateful that the City of Cape Town has been willing to have the conversations. I mean, we've signed a memorandum of understanding with them, and they are willing to take this kind of resolving this issue forward. But you just have to open page 22 of the report. If not, in fact, it's page 20. If you can all open page 20 of your report and look at the graph that sets out a process that a micro developer or a home-based developer has to follow to get compliance. Just looking at the graph, you get overwhelmed. Imagine having to do it, you know? So for me, the issue is, it is so complex that it just begs the question why, as a country, we continue to regulate ourselves into low growth. Because we can't have economic growth with the types of regulations that we have. If we need economic growth, we need to recognize that the small scale developer or the SMME sector or entrepreneurship, whichever word we prefer to use, that's what's going to take us there. We need to be able to move with people on the ground and put agency in the hands of our citizens to say, do what you can where you are to make sure that we move forward as a country. We hear yesterday, was it in Q2, we grew by 1.9%. I was saying, I'm sure those small scale developers contributed to that, but nobody will record it specifically because we don't know the detail of it. And this is why the work of documentation that DEG must continue is important, because we should be able to take this out and say, in fact, we can proudly show you that this small scale development sector or this micro developers in townships has a contribution to economic growth, but specifically to local economic development in townships, because this is the issue. Economic growth doesn't happen at a national level. It happens at a local scale. And we need to recognize this and say, what can we do differently at a local level to make sure that agencies place in the hands of our people so that they can make sure that they contribute progressively to issues of growth. I think that, you know, I was pleased to see Zama's slide earlier, talking about where DEG came from with people's housing process. And I thought, actually, this is people's housing process. This is housing for the people, by the people. So the people who come from these areas who understand the need are responding to it, and they're saying, we are going to do it with or without the support of government. What we are seeing across the country is that we're financing in different metros. We see that in, city of Joburg has a town planning scheme that allows medium densities in Soweto. It makes it easier. But when the moment you start moving across into Ekurhuleni, it's difficult. You can't finance there until you start having your plans approved and going through the hoops, and the ability to support that process from a administrative point of view. And I don't know whether they are overwhelmed, or public servants, or whether they don't understand the need or the problem. They're just looking at the textbook. It becomes difficult to even know who to talk to. And this is, you coming in as a funder saying, I have money bags. I'm willing to put money in your area. Please help us help these guys get compliance. They can't tell you who to talk to. So imagine being Mercy. You're not coming with money bags. You just want your plan approved. They ignore you. You don't get the support that you need. And what do? You then ignore the process and you build anyway. We can't continue, of course, with that. We are accepting that. Tekwini is another example. Tekwini, I always say, doesn't have plans, doesn't have many plans, grand plans, but they are very good at managing, at following through and finding you if you do something wrong. So at Tekwini, you in fact can't even do anything because they will catch you in 2 minutes. So at Tekwini, we're trying to finance and we are unable to finance. In Cape Town, we started, I think that we were guilty by association with our clients in that, this problem of masking, it's pointed out nicely in the report. It's a real issue. It happens in eThekwini as well. The issue for me with this is that it undermines the ability of these assets to become property, real property assets that someone can transact and trade in the market. You have the value that you want to get to so that you can build the wealth that you want to build for your family. Currently, with your unit that's developed there for 1.5 million with no plans, you can't get insurance. That 1.5 million value is not there. It's going to really depend on a willing buyer to come and say, I actually see the 1.5 million, I can give it to you. But an astute negotiator will say, well, you don't have your plans. So because I'm buying a risky asset, I want a discount for that. So these guys are not going to realize that value. So it's a problem. So I wanted to talk about problems today, I'm sorry. I'm happy that the report points out the problems properly, though. I think it has understood them because we've had these conversations many times. DAG has different other publications that it has put forward on the sector, trying to understand the single mother, trying to understand the micro developer, etc. And all these things, if you read them, they are consistent in terms of what the issues are. And I think what it's saying to us is, let's then take those issues and implement a solution now and try to achieve a mid-road that says micro developers today are already building these things. How can we make it easier for them to build more? How can we make it easier for them to make sure that the ones that they already have are compliant and insured, so that when these assets face what happened in KZN recently with floods, that these assets can be able to get access to insurance. So I think for me, that's important, that talking must now end. We have all the information. We now need to move with speed from a regulation point of view to say, how do we make these things possible? Thanks.
That's good. Thank you, Ms. Sanda. I think one of the things that I really appreciated about the report was that it didn't start with a recommendation that we set up a separate national program with its own conditional grant. The lack of creativity and practical knowledge that we see in so many reports that start that way. So I really appreciate that the report took the situation as it is, with our fiscal constraints, with our IGR context, with our financial framework, and said, what can we do within this? Both in the short, medium, and long term as well. I think that's really important. The other thing that I'm conscious of as I listen to this conversation is that 10 years ago, we were talking about backyard rental. And we were talking about backyard rental in terms of the consumers of housing, the tenants and the people living in the backyard. We were talking about the level of services and the adequacy of the housing. We need to give ourselves credit. We've now actually shifted the conversation to talk about this as a delivery sector, right? We're actually talking this afternoon about small scale rental, not backyard rental, not consumer oriented, but small scale rental in terms of thinking as developers, micro developers, as contractors, as homeowner entrepreneurs. That's a really important shift. And I like that we're gotten away from the conversation that was, how can we use subsidy money to build a top structure for people who are already in backyards? How can we use subsidy money to install services? We're recognizing the agency of the entrepreneurs and the developers that are already there and have been doing their thing for a long time without help from national. We're saying, actually, how can we help you in a way that doesn't get in the way? I think that's the other piece about this entire sector, is that government needs to be extremely careful, and unintended consequences were spoken about this morning, but government needs to be extremely careful to do no harm when we intervene in this sector. So if we're thinking about, I'll take, for example, we've been talking about loosening the regulations or lowering the standards for some of the national building regulations. And it brings up a tension that I think we see over and over in housing and essentially in all development work, which is that one half of the room is saying we've got different markets. We've got 53% of the sector is informal. Our local government needs to be a government for the informal sector. It's actually designed right now to be a government for the formal processes and the formal parts of the city, but it actually needs to concentrate more of its resources on the informal sector. So we're thinking about that. But the difficulty is that we're not, how do I say this? We're not then shifting our focus. So we need to really move towards thinking, as we said, about small scale developers as deliverers, as part of the sector in delivery. But the example I was going to think of was that the Rental Housing Amendment Act, which has now been in place, I think, since 2014. When the conversation and the debate was happening around that, one of the pushes was to make sure that there was this framework to protect people in lower income areas, tenants in lower income areas. And one of the ideas that's contained in that act, and is actually in the law, though it's not been gazetted, is that all leases need to be written. Every single lease, backyards everywhere. That's the law right now. Now, the argument that was being made was that this doesn't make sense at all for the informal sector. It's going to have unintended consequences of pushing some people out of their homes and also urging some landlords to not bother with this and moving their cousin in instead of having a tenant in the back. Okay, so we had lots of concerns around the impact on supply and on the market. Right? But the flip side of that argument, and that we hear, I think, with all due respect, from politicians largely, is people living in low-income areas and townships deserve the same rights protections that somebody staying in Santon does. So why is it okay to lower building regulations for particular areas of the country? Isn't that racist? Isn't that working against particular sectors of the community? Now that can be responded to, but I think we need to be realistic as we stand here, because we're saying over and over, and we need to change the national building regulations. That's the issue we're going to get when we go to the national building regulations and to the national department. We can't justify loosening our protections for people who have less money. And explain to us how we could possibly justify that. So there needs to be a further shift to talk about the different economies that we have and that different policy responses are appropriate for different economies. I don't think we're there yet. All that having been said, I apologize for taking over the mic. I want to open it up a little bit to have a conversation with the panelists. And let me start. Erica, I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to get straight to the practicalities. So let's just get to the bare bones. Prof, you spoke quite a bit about, wouldn't it make more sense if everybody just sat around the table from all the different directorates and looked at a particular application for a 6-unit development in Kailicha, and we all brainstormed together and decided whether or not it's going to work and it should have approval. The approach that was put forward this morning is very much transversal, working impacting on planning and on finance and on human settlements, on basic services, on water, all of these. So it requires a coordination in the local government, which we know is not always effective. Right? And I think in many cases, it actually is the main barrier to implementation. It's not external, it's internal. So I guess my question, Erica, is we would all love to see the sit around the table scenario, but I'm guessing that that's not doable if you go back to the office on Monday. So can you actually speak about what actually stops that from happening in reality? And what could we do that would actually be possible? Because it's very easy to talk about interdepartmental, transversal platforms. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah. So the city is quite a complex institution and organism as well. So, and in many respects, you know, there are still the different silos. So everybody has got their own area of expertise, and it sometimes gets very difficult, you know, because we don't have all the capacity in the world to sit around the table every day to discuss, because today it's a requirement for the small scale rental units. I see Dion is here. He will tell you about the pressure that we are under with some of the larger developers as well, who want dedicated resources to fast track their developments. It's just impossible at the end of the day to basically try and meet the needs of everybody at that level. We don't have the staff resources to do that. Okay, it's just impossible. What I would like to say is that where we are trying to fill that gap is, and it's one of the recommendations in the report, specifically, I think in your report, you refer to the local planning support office. We refer to it as the Center of Excellence. It's got different names at the moment, but one of the key deliverables that we are working towards is the institutional arrangements around creating these very localized planning offices in these particular areas where we want to roll out this program. Now, the way that we have conceptualized those offices is that it has a whole range of skills and competencies within that. So from the broader planning issues that can give direction around density, creation of the actual livable spaces, so looking at your social requirements, etc., right through to the education and awareness creation about how we engage with the community, how do we engage with the developers in that area, including the support center that will help you with your building plan itself in terms of the prototypical building plans, and help you actually to put the plan together that meets the needs of the property owner or the developer, as well as the person who's actually got the necessary authority in order to approve that plan in that local office. So it will have a whole range of skills, etc. So we hope by the identification of the specific areas where we want to implement the overlay zones, that we can proactively address a lot of the issues around the infrastructure. So whether it's about the transport, whether it's about any of the other infrastructure, we start addressing those issues up front. And then in the implementation process, we will have the local office and the local planning support office that will have that kind of relationship. The intentions were also that that office will have the relationship with all the service departments within that local area, to be able to build up that knowledge and understanding about where there might be capacity constraints or issues, or how we address it, or what conditionalities would be related to it, etc. So that's how we try and fill the gap. It requires additional resources, so it's not something that we have currently in our structure. So we're also obviously engaging, and the NEC Finance is laughing at me because he knows that we're coming with our proposal in terms of how do we implement this. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I'm going to just direct one more question, and then we'll open it up. So you can think about from the presentation this morning from Dr. Turok as well as from Zama, if there are questions of clarification or for anybody on the panel. But just before we do that, I wanted to go back to the social contract idea. It was a slide at the end that was, as you admitted yourself, fairly vague. So I'd be interested to think, particularly from Masivilani and Lusanda, where is that acting as a barrier, and what could actually be done to shift that social contract and to make it work? Because we tend to move into vagaries when we get to that space. Oh, I stymied you.
So it's difficult for me to comment on that, in that, it's a very local issue about how you engage and are able to be understood and received by the communities. The reality is that we finance in these communities, and we need to be able to make sure that jobs that are created for local people, that that the contractors used are from the local area. So we do have sometimes those challenges where you have to navigate that, and you have to work with people, a councillor in the area, to make sure that you gain the necessary support. But I would say that from a financing point of view, we haven't really seen a need for a social contract. In fact, if anything, we've tried to avoid that. We were in researching in Masiphumelele in the earlier days, and there was a very active community representation group. And for us, we felt that that would, in a way, muddy the waters in terms of a contractual relationship between a funder and their client who's borrowed money that they need to repay. So it's very important for us that the relationship is one-on-one, because when the asset works, it works for that one individual, and that one individual needs to take responsibility for what they enter into. The relationship between tenant and landlord is also a one-on-one relationship between tenant and landlord. And the moment you actively try to get community involved, it again muddies the waters, in my view. I don't want to sound like I'm undermining the good work that civil society is doing in these areas. It's important that we get them involved in trying to sort of make the right, or say the right messages in the right places about supporting infrastructure in these areas, to make sure that it can carry the load that we are suggesting in terms of these medium densities. It's important that you have people talking about the rights of tenants, so that these landlords don't start getting greedy and evicting people and raising rentals unreasonably. So you need some sort of activism in the communities. But from a funder point of view, it's not something that we engage with directly, but where we are requested to come and engage, we do. This new issue around it was mainly in eThekwini, these guys demanding 30% of the site. Forget now what they're called, business forums. Don't know if you know of them. It's a community, it was supposedly a community-led thing, but in my view, it was a criminal action led by a couple of people who wanted to make money. But the principles that came out of it, at least in the early days, was again this issue of involving local contractors, local businesses, creating jobs for local people, and NGOs that could understand that dynamic. I think that would be important if they can get involved in trying to resolve that. But I see that there's some policing directorate that's being set up to try and manage that. In Khayelitsha, we've been hearing of stories of people demanding protection fees. We haven't necessarily experienced much of that ourselves, but it's an issue of concern that needs activism from the whole of the community, councillors, NGOs operating there and trying to find a solution, because it's simply unacceptable. It's illegal, it's a criminal act, and it needs to be called as such and dealt with accordingly. So for me, I think that yes, it's a needed thing. We support the idea of a social contract. We just have to find how we plot ourselves as financiers in that space.
It's very messy at a local level. Manzi, and then I want to give an opportunity to Seth and Sama, and then we'll open it back up.
Look, the townships are quite diverse in their making. For instance, if you look at Ilita Park, Side B, Kukuletu, Mandalay, and so on, and other areas that I will not mention. Some communities are very much engaging, they're very much involved, they're very much vigilant, they are aware of what is happening. In terms of the social contract, we try to engage all structures that are there in these communities. For instance, if they see that it is kind of like construction taking place, they will be the first to come and say, "What are you doing?" And are you building flats? For instance, in our case, they ask those questions. So it's also the leadership in the area are very much involved. There are even WhatsApp groups that are created. If they see any structure that is they're unfamiliar with, they start raising questions. Who are you? What do you do here? How was this property purchased, and so on. So even in terms of trying to assist the community in terms of job opportunities, we'll engage the local structures. For instance, the people that are just be doing mainly the brickwork, we've tried to assist during the construction. Even other developers, I will also speak for them. They are very much involved in making sure that those people are actually engaged all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I think I got excited when Alison spoke about the social contract. And for me, I think I'll be bold to say, okay, sorry, Kuma. I'll be bold to say between DEC and the communities and different stakeholders, there's a social contract, but it's not a signed document. We delivered PHP projects in Khayelitsha because the vision that we had was shared by everyone when we were delivering the 2173 houses in Khayelitsha. During our time in delivering those houses in Khayelitsha, there was a construction strike that was nationwide. 2014, all construction sites were stopped, but our construction site in Khayelitsha was never stopped, even though we had an office in Khayelitsha, because there is this social contract between us, or there was this social contract between us and the beneficiaries of the Khayelitsha projects. But it is not only the direct beneficiaries, but the indirect beneficiaries. And this particular case for me, I can boldly say this social contract is developing between the different stakeholders in the city of Cape Town. For example, I can share information with Charles, and I know Charles is not going to go out there and say Zama this and Zama that. And even myself, I will not go out and say Charles this and Charles that. That's what we need within the sector, capacitating each other, but the trust relationships. For example, when we engage with developers, we always say to them, while you are building within a particular community, engage with your local committees. The SANCO members within your community, within your neighborhood, should better understand what is it that you are doing. So even with this sector, if there can be that shared understanding, that shared vision, without even signing a contract, I think for me, if people better understand to say, look, Mons is building flats, these are the benefits that will come There will be people who will be getting affordable housing, but there will be someone who will be doing rent management. There will be someone who will be cleaning the yard. People who